Ottawa has been rocked by the fallout from a parliamentary report that suggests MPs have been witting or semi-witting participants in foreign interference. The report, released June 3rd, also implies one instance of an MP providing privileged information to a foreign operative. I'm Dave Breckenridge, and this is 10-3. National Post politics reporter Ryan Tumilty joins me to discuss what we've learned about the report, the reaction in Parliament, and whether we'll eventually see any of the MPs' names released. Don't forget, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon Music. I'd love it if you could leave us a rating, a review, and tell your friends about the show. So Ryan, as many people know, Canada just went through an inquiry into whether there was foreign interference in the last couple of elections. And now, 10 days ago, we see the release of a report suggesting interference potentially didn't stop there. Before we kind of get into the details, who's the report from and what were their broad concerns?
Yeah, so the report was from a group called NSICOP. It's the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, which is why they go by NSICOP. But it is an all-party committee. It also includes senators. And what they do is that they meet behind closed doors. This isn't a typical committee that meets out in public. They meet with intelligence officials. They read classified information. They are supposed to be able to read just about anything the government has when it comes to intelligence information. And they issue these reports back to the public. They go through security clearances. They are vetted before they can appear on that committee. And when they report out, their reports are censored by intelligence agencies. So the intelligence agencies will say, we can't have you revealing this detail or that detail, but maybe you can just summarize it, or maybe you can be a little less specific here or there. So these reports are fascinating insights into what's going on, but they are very highly attuned and very specifically worded.
So the report that was released 10 days ago, what did that look into and what did it reveal?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting report. It was commissioned by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister asked this committee to look into this around the same time that he appointed David Johnston as the special rapporteur to look into foreign interference. And it looked at foreign interference in the 2019 and 2021 elections, but it also went more broadly. And that is part of the role of this committee, is it can set its own parameters. It took that request from the Prime Minister, but it went a bit more broadly. And what it came back with was that, foreign interference goes well beyond elections. It was very clear that we're not just talking about federal politics. We're talking about provincial and municipal politics. We're talking about community associations and corporate boards. Foreign powers find different ways to influence outcomes. And so it talked about all of that. I think the real, headlines out of this, of course, was it said that there are MPs who are either wittingly or semi-wittingly helping foreign powers after having received help in the last elections.
And so what countries are we talking about here? Is it as revealed in the foreign interference inquiry, China and India? And then how did the MPs supposedly participate wittingly or semi-wittingly? Is it all espionage, or are there other instances that perhaps don't rise to the level of a crime?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the short answer is we don't know. In terms of the countries involved, they are identified in the report. It is China, it is India, it is Iran. These are countries that we've heard about many times before, including Russia as well as countries that attempt to interfere in Canada's elections and Canada's democracy writ large. So those are the named countries. In terms of what specifically MPs have done that raises to this level of concern, it's a little bit more vague. I'll read you one section here. This is so what the committee does when they write their report is they talk about what they can say, and then they identify that some paragraphs have been removed from their report by intelligence agencies. And so there was one of those things where it says, these sentences describe examples of members of parliament who work to influence their colleagues on India's behalf and proactively provided confidential information to Indian officials. That's all it says. So, what exactly that looked like? Were they touting the benefits of an India trade deal because they thought that would benefit them and their communities? Or were they passing classified information to the Indian government? It's really hard to tell from this report exactly what was going on.
You do mention though that there was one instance that was pointed out where it was a Canadian MP met with an intelligence agent of a foreign power. So there are concerns about some serious allegations here.
Absolutely. And even those allegations about MPs meeting with Indian officials, those are quite serious. But the one you mentioned is quite telling. It says, and this is one that the committee really wanted to highlight as deeply concerning. And it said, according to CSIS, a member of parliament sought to arrange a meeting in a foreign state with a senior intelligence official and also proactively provided the intelligence officer with information provided in confidence. They were actively reaching out to a foreign intelligence officer and providing information. That is a really serious charge. We don't know in the report what country this was. We know that they are no longer a member of parliament, but we don't know when they left or who they represented or even what party they're from.
Now, I imagine when this all broke, fellow parliamentarians took it all in stride, rather calmly, right? What's the political reaction been here?
It's been sort of all over the map. I think one sort of common thread, one sort of common sentiment that you are hearing from MPs and senators is that this report is really troubling because it casts a cloud over everybody. We don't know who the MPs are. We know that they're in more than one party. We know that there are several of them, but that's all we know. And so we don't know any kind of specifics. And, a lot of MPs from many different parties have said, from all parties, have said that this report puts them all under suspicion. And that's a really troubling aspect. The Conservatives have sort of really consistently been calling for the government to release all the names that are contained in this report. The government has so far refused to do that and continues to insist it will refuse to do that. I would say, over the weekend, some of the opposition parties came together with what seems to be a proposal. They didn't do this jointly, but they all put forward the same idea, which is that all of this information that this NSICOP committee had should go to the Hogue inquiry, which is the inquiry led by a justice that is going on right now that is looking into foreign interference. But I would say in general, there's a fair amount of concern about what this is doing to our democracy and a fair amount of concern about, what it says about Parliament.
There's been a lot of discussion about what's actually in the report. And, it took Elizabeth May from the Green Party to turn around and say, well, I took a look at the unredacted report and there isn't a list of names. Is there a list of names? Are there implications that even if it's not in this report, that there is a list of names of MPs somewhere?
Yeah, I don't think that there is in the report, an appendix that says, here be the list of traitors. That's not what we're talking about here. But I think the report is in places going to, it's hard to guess because I haven't read the unredacted report and I'm probably the last person they'll give it to. But there are sections where they identify that they are concerned about specific MPs. So I have to think in the report, those MPs are identified. I have to think that in many areas of the report that are left vague, there are more specifics that would be quite telling if we knew what they are. I don't think there is a specific list of names, but I think there is, some more detail than what we have.
We'll be right back. Is there an indication that this information is potentially being used by law enforcement agencies to investigate the activities of MPs, to potentially charge those who were involved in illegal acts, if there are illegal acts at play here, that they could be charged. And at that point, we may see names released.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely one avenue where we might see names released. I don't know if we'll ever see a situation in which someone is charged and then they say, by the way, this is the person that we were talking about in page whatever of the NSICOP report. I don't know if they'll ever tie those two things together. The RCMP have said the day after this report came out, they had a statement out. They said that they are pursuing many investigations into foreign interference, and that those investigations do include Canada's, I think they said, democratic systems, but certainly they are looking at, the House of Commons and legislatures, etc. We don't know specifics of those investigations for fairly obvious reasons, but we do know that this is something the RCMP is seized at. What comes up in the NSICOP report, has come up in a lot of reports around this topic, is one of the principal challenges here. So this NSICOP report we believe to be mostly based on CSIS evidence. CSIS information is intelligence. It is not something that would hold up in a court of law. It is not something usually that could ever reach a court of law. Much of it may not even be ours. It might be information that one of our Five Eyes partners collected. So one of the really big challenges for any sort of RCMP investigation that would release that information is how to take intelligence and transfer it over to something that might look like evidence. One of the examples that's out there is, there are foreign diplomats in this country who might be bragging to their home countries about all the work they have done to interfere in our elections or to recruit MPs as spies, but they may be making stuff up to their home countries. So none of that would hold up if you were trying to put it in front of a judge or a jury.
Mm-hmm. So a separate investigation would have to be done. Essentially, they potentially take this intelligence and then try and prove it in a way that could be entered into a court. As you mentioned, parties agreed to ask Justice Hogue to investigate allegations of treason by current and former parliamentarians. Do we have an indication whether she is going to include that as part of her work?
We don't actually. I think her commission is fairly broad, and she gets a fair amount of leeway to decide what she studies and researches. She does have kind of a ticking clock deadline, of course, of the end of this year. So, she may not be eager to take on a whole other aspect of this investigation. I know that what the justice is supposed to be working on right now is moving towards, recommendations on how to address this problem. Her first report came out, last month and identified, the facts of the case, what foreign interference looked like, what impact it might have had, did the government do enough? Those sorts of questions were in her first report. Her second report is really the big one. It's how do you address this problem? And so, that might take on some of these questions about MPs, but it might not as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the middle of all this is, we talked about the foreign interference inquiry, there's this report. You just had a piece last week as well about how the government is potentially blocking access to documents, saying that NSICOP is asking for information from the federal government. What is that information related to? Is it related to this file? Is it related to their other work? And what documents are the government apparently withholding?
Yeah, so right after NSICOP came out with their report on the elections and democratic institutions, they came out with an annual report. They put one out every year. And in that annual report, it said that, thousands of pages of documents had been withheld from them as part of their investigations, and that these documents generally were what are considered cabinet confidences. So I'll do a boring civics lecture here for a moment, if you'll indulge me. A cabinet confidence is a piece of information or a document or a transcript of deliberations that indicate what was said at the cabinet table. And it is sort of fundamental to the democracy that we have that conversations that happen at that table remain confidential, that options that are considered at that table remain confidential. And the idea behind that is you want ministers to be able to speak their mind at a table like that without having to worry that it looks like they, didn't agree with their own government. Or, if you were talking about some sort of really serious matter, launching a war or something like that, that they could be branded politically to be against the thing because they spoke out at it. You want free, frank, open discussion at that cabinet table when ministers are making sort of the biggest decisions the country has. So, what the government has said is the information they declined to provide to NSICOP is that cabinet confidence information.
Looking back at NSICOP's work and its report, what has the response been from that committee to either the discussion around its report or the allegations contained within?
Yeah, what we haven't seen from them is really a reaction. So they have a chair of that committee, he's a Liberal MP, David McGuinty, well known, well respected, a long interest in security and intelligence matters, not really considered a particularly partisan MP. And I think that's part of why he's in the position that he's in. They have not really responded. And what David McGuinty will say over and over and over again is that he can really only say what they wrote down in the report. He was asked the other day to sort of respond to Elizabeth May's interpretation of his report. We know NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is going to read the report, and I suspect he will respond and say what he thinks of it. I don't suspect, though, that David McGuinty is going to come out and say, oh, well, they were wrong about this and they were wrong about that. These reports, as David McGuinty describes them, get drafted inch by inch, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. And he does not want to deviate from the text because in some cases to do so, he might accidentally reveal something he wasn't supposed to. And so that is sort of the challenge he is in. They just, he always says the report speaks for itself.
And lastly, as it happens, the head of CSIS appeared before a Commons committee on Tuesday, and I'm curious what he had to say about concerns around foreign interference in Canada.
He is consistent. I think he has been saying the same message for quite some time that foreign interference is a real and persistent threat, that it is mostly coming from China. I would say, India is almost a new player in this world, but I don't think his message on this issue has really changed. He has really been consistent about that it is a persistent and ongoing threat, that interfering with our democracy is something that other powers will do as long as they think it benefits them.
Could there be any developments on this without charges? I mean, we have the report, we have the ask of the Hogue Commission to potentially investigate this. We have parties calling for the release of names. It probably won't happen. Where does it go from here? Or is this kind of, this report is what it is, and Canadians kind of have to live in the dark for a while?
Yeah, I think that is a tough question to answer, and I'm really not sure where this goes next. I think absolutely we would find out some names if the RCMP ever got around to laying charges, but we've talked about how challenging that might be. Certainly, the Hogue inquiry could potentially release names. If someone knows the names, they could leak them. They could walk onto the floor of the House of Commons and use their parliamentary privilege to tell us all about them. I think this is going to be an ongoing thing. And I think what's really interesting, though, is what you're starting to hear, and certainly this is what the Hogue inquiry is supposed to do, like we talked about, is move towards how to change this. So one of the things that is talked about, we've talked about these MPs, but the NSICOP report really makes the case that this is a much broader problem right across Canadian political life. And it really strongly makes recommendations that it's past time that parties clean up their own nomination processes. The nomination of local candidates is probably the only part of the political process that isn't somehow overseen by Elections Canada. And so, there's a lot of calls now to clean up that process because, in some ridings in the country, winning the nomination is winning the seat. There are so many safe conservative or liberal seats that, once you win the nomination, you're going to be an MP. And so that has been really the big pressure. I'm not sure if we're going to get a response on, who are these people and what exactly did they do. I wouldn't hold my breath for that. But I think we might start to get a response on something that could clean up the whole system a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, I know it's definitely a story Canadians have their attentions tuned to, and we'll see what kind of developments we get on it. Ryan, thanks for your time.
No problem.
10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest, Ryan Tumilty. More from him at nationalpost.com. I'm Dave Breckenridge. Thanks for listening.